Well, hello everybody, I'm back for part two of my week one video musings. And what I'm going to do is go through the remaining readings with you from week one and point out some important ideas here. So, the first document that I'd like for you to pull up and follow along with me is What is Literature? And to find it, go to Content up at the top of our Brightspace course page and then go to Course Documents, and you'll have to scroll all the way down and hit Load More, and then scroll all the way down again, and then you'll come to What is Literature? So we're kind of starting at the very beginning here. So what is literature anyway? Why does it matter? What does it do? What are its genres or types? And why should we read it? If we don't start to think about why it matters, then, it doesn't really matter. So, literature, by definition, is imaginative or creative writing, especially of recognized artistic value. And there are three major genres or kinds, and that's fictional stories, poems, and plays, right? Now, some of these terms will come back to haunt you later on toward the end of the semester on that exam on literary terms. And so, when we get close to that exam, we'll have a review, but some of those questions will come from this sheet. The canon. So if you have studied the Bible, if you're a biblical scholar at all, you've probably heard that term, the canon, associated with the Bible. And what it refers to there is the listing of all of the books that make up what we now know to be the Holy Bible. So all of the writings that made it into that book. And so the meaning of this term in literature in general is very much similar. It refers to a select, if much debated and ever-changing list of the most highly respected, widely esteemed works according to literary scholars. So we're looking at some texts this semester that have already made it into the canon. They're already considered by scholars to be highly respected, and others that are too new to have earned that status yet, but they've already drawn a claim. So we've got some goals, and number one is to encourage you to think for yourself about what counts as imaginative writing of artistic value. To think for yourself, which is the big goal of college. Number two, to give you the tools to communicate your thoughts effectively to other people. Because if you can think, but you don't know how to communicate your skills via the written word or the spoken word, then we're in trouble, right? And then number three, to think about what makes a story or a poem different from just reading, say, a newspaper column or a technical manual. Now, my husband is a retired audio mixer / engineer, and he reads nothing but audio manuals, and that he will sit and read for hours on end. Boring. He can't hear me right now. Very boring. He will not read my short stories or my poems or my novel that I'm writing, but he will read an audio manual. Go figure. So, what other kinds of writing can be studied from a literary point of view? Well, I submit that we could look at some essays from a literary point of view. Song lyrics. A song lyric is just a poem set to music. And I'm a professional BMI songwriter. That's what I did for most of my life. So when we get to the unit on poetry, we'll actually be looking at some song lyrics. A screenplay, a romance novel. Now I think of my little grandmother who lived to be 96 years old, and she would sit in her little recliner. And she'd have her little glasses down like this. And she'd have one of those large print romance novels in front of her with a picture of some shirtless guy with long hair flowing in the wind. And she'd be reading her romance novel in a literary fashion, no doubt. A novel by Toni Morrison, one of my favorite writers ever. A poem by Emily Dickinson. All of these kinds of works can be read and interpreted in literary ways that yield insight and pleasure. So what makes the literary way of reading something different from just your average, normal, everyday reading? Well, reading in a literary way doesn't just focus on gaining information or solving a problem, like, let me figure out how to change this tire. I'm going to read this manual here to figure out how to make this stupid computer over here do what I want it to do. I hate my computer. No, reading in a literary way centers on uncovering deeper layers of meaning within a text that connect to something universal. Emotions, meanings, bonds that almost everyone can feel and understand and relate to. So it's like the difference between taking a trip just to hurry and get there, or taking a trip to really enjoy and experience the journey. So what does literature do? It doesn't just talk about things. Works of literature bring things to life for us by representing real human experience, and so they become an experience for us as readers, one that engages our emotions, our imaginations, our senses, our intellects. And literature also offers us the means to escape from our everyday lives. This is another thing that I love about literature. So it liberates us from the confines of our own time and place and social status. And it liberates us from our habitual enslaved ways of thinking sometimes too, right? And feeling and looking at the world. So we can travel into the past. We can imagine the future through literature. We can journey into our own selves to discover more about who we are. Literature doesn't necessarily and usually will not offer us the answers to life's great problems or to life's great questions. It will present the problems and pose the questions over and over and over and over. It will make you ponder the answers, right? And it does allow us to put ourselves in the shoes of someone else, to develop empathy for someone who may be very, very, very different from you and me, who may live in a different part of the world, in a different time in history, in a very different situation and circumstance. And so we can gain insight into different perspectives, and we can feel the consequences of human behavior. And finally, literature awakens in us the power, the beauty, the complexity of words. And that's our main tool for engaging with and understanding and shaping the world around us every day. So it's like entering into this vast, ongoing conversation that's just going on and on and on. And so you've got to figure out what's been said already, right? You need to do a little research and figure out what's already been said about this piece that I'm reading now. And you'll find out that there can be as many different interpretations of a piece of literature as there are students in a classroom. And some people are like, what? How can that be? This great diversity of interpretation might mean that to talk about the whole thing is just kind of pointless. But actually, I would argue that just the opposite is true. This is when the discussion gets most interesting, when one student in a discussion board posting can say, oh gosh, I think the main theme of this piece is X. And another student comes along and says, well, I can see that, but I actually thought that it was Y. And here is a quote to show you why I think that my interpretation is correct. And a third student comes along and says, well, you both make good points, but actually I found the theme of the text to be totally different from you guys. And the cool part is that these can all be correct answers, as long as they make sense with textual evidence from that short story or that poem or that piece of drama. So the really cool thing is, after that process of sort of close reading a work and testing your ideas against your classmates' ideas and my ideas, the work's meaning can change yet again when you reread it. So what we do with literature changes what it does to us. And that's why I'm a big literary nerd. The next little piece that I want to go over with you, also found in course documents, is entitled The Elements of Fiction. And so it appears a little bit above what is literature. So you probably know what an allegory is, right? That's a story or a poem in which the characters represent a value or a meaning outside of that work itself. So people and things and events have maybe a hidden or a symbolic meaning behind the literal surface meaning. And so allegories are often used to teach a moral, sort of a moral principle or something like that. And a good example is that piece Young Goodman Brown, where the wife of the main character, her name is Faith, represents faith in God and family and community. The work Pilgrim's Progress, if you're familiar with it, it's just pure allegory because every character represents or is a symbol of something. So that's allegory. Allusion, not illusion with an I, but allusion with an A, is a brief reference to a famous person or place or phrase or event that a lot of readers might be familiar with. And it's effective because of the associations and the connotations. Oh, there's a word that's going to haunt you in this class. You need to know it right now. The emotional meanings of the words that the allusion has for an informed reader. So every word, almost every word in every language, this is really cool, except for maybe words like articles, like the, a, to be verbs like was or is. Every word almost has a denotative meaning and a connotative meaning. So when you hear that word denotative, think dictionary, the literal dictionary meaning. But when you hear that word connotative, think of all the associations you make in your mind when you hear a word, all the baggage that word carries with it, whether good or bad. So with allusion, it's effective because of those associations, those connotative meanings that the words carry. But the allusion only works if it's understood and appreciated by the reader. And names are a very common form of allusion. You might need to actually read the footnotes to figure it out. So, for an example, in Young Goodman Brown, again, allusions are made in that story to the names of the actual people who were tried as witches in the Salem witch trials of the 17th century. But if you did not know that those were the real names of those real historical people, you wouldn't get the allusion. Ambiguity and ambivalence. Now, these are two words that are going to surface in some of the discussion board postings that we'll be doing a little later. So if a work is ambiguous, it can have more than one meaning. It can have a double meaning or a multiple meaning, which could result in uncertainty about the significance of a particular statement within that text. Words in literature are able to suggest two or more equally suitable meanings, and they can have two or more meanings all at the same time. So here's an example, again, in Young Goodman Brown. The ending is ambiguous. So did the main character really have a meeting with the devil? Or did he just dream the whole thing? Have you ever seen a film or a television show where you get to the end and you don't know whether it was real or the person just dreamed it? That's an example of ambiguity. And then ambivalence is closely associated with ambiguity. So this is where a work has feelings or attitudes that conflict with each other, right? So there may be contradictory attitudes toward the characters. And in fact, the work may actually call for a confusion of attitude or response for us, the reader, to the work. The writer's whole point may be to cause us to feel really confused. And you'll see that in some of the texts that we read. We know that an analogy is a comparison of two things that are alike in some ways, different in others. So metaphor is an implied analogy. Bill is a pig. Simile is an expressed analogy. Bill eats like a pig. It's more explicit. It uses the words like or as to make the comparison. So now we get to characterization, and these are important ideas for us to think about as we approach paper one, because you're writing a character analysis, right? So we know that a character is a person in a novel, a short story, a play, a poem, but there are all different types of them, just like there are different kinds of people in real life. So the character may be flat. So the character does not change or grow. The character is static. The character just is there to add clues or information that help develop the story. Is indistinguishable from others in a group or in a job or a class. They're not individual, they're just representative of this group, right? They're useful to add background information or local color, and flat characters can also be called stock characters. Then we get to a caricature. So that's a character that's also not fully developed, but as opposed to a flat character, a caricature has one single dominant trait, like the villain, the funny, or the bad guy, or the clown, the funny guy in the piece, right? And then a static character changes maybe a little bit, if at all. But the problem is that the change happens to the character, but not within the character. Have you ever known a person like that in real life? Where things happen to them, but they never change. They just truck right on down the road with the same old ideas and mindset. So that's a static character. What we are looking for are round characters that may grow or change. They're bigger than life. They may be dynamic. They stand out. They're not totally identifiable with a group or a class or an occupation. They have lots of real traits. They seem like a real human being. They're fully developed by the author. They have depth emotionally and intellectually. They're as complicated as a real living person. And the characters we really love are the dynamic ones, okay? So they are always modified or changed by the actions through which they pass. In fact, the whole point of the work is to reveal the change. So that's the difference between a round character and a dynamic character. The round character might change. The dynamic character always changes. And the whole point is to reveal the change that happens to him or her, right? So as you're writing paper one, you want to think about, is my character dynamic or round? And what kind of character am I writing about? And that gives you something to write about in paper one. Next, you see the dramatic plot structure. And unfortunately, in the uploading process, you should see sort of an arc like this. And instead, you're seeing lines going that way. So good old Brightspace distorted my formatting here. But I can still sort of go through the arc with you and explain it. We know what plot is, right? That's a term in literature that we use that relates to what happens in the piece. So the series of related events and actions. This is carefully selected by the author, involving a struggle or a conflict which is eventually resolved. It's the plan of action of the work. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. I would object to that carefully selected by the author. As a creative writer, I have to tell you, when writers sit down and they say, I'm going to let this happen to this character. Oh, now I'm going to let that happen. And I'm going to plan and plot it out and scheme it all out. And now I'm going to let this happen. I'm going to outline this and this and this and this. It flops. When you're writing creatively, you are a channel, right? And while it's important to know your craft, if you ever lose that feeling of being a channel and of just getting in the zone and letting that creativity happen, then your writing is going to be too staged. So exposition happens at the beginning of a piece. It's the introductory material that creates the tone. It gives us the setting. It introduces the characters. It supplies all the facts that we need to figure out what's going on, right? Then we have the rising action. So it's related to the complications and the conflicts. It sometimes starts out with this boom, big exciting force. It will usually gain in interest and power as opposing groups or ideas come into conflict with each other, and it proceeds to the conflict. So the complication is the problem caused by the conflict. It's the tying of the knot, which will be untied at the end in the resolution. And it is found in the rising action, right? We've got to have some struggle. We got to have complications and conflict. That struggle that grows out of the interaction between two opposing forces. It provides the interest for us, the suspense, the tension. And at least one of those opposing forces is usually a person in the conflict, right? So now, I love to watch The Young and the Restless. That is one of my guilty pleasures. My son used to call it The Young and the Rest of Us. When he was little, he thought that was the name. I guess he was the young and I was the rest of us. I don't know. But I used to make him watch it. God bless him. and he's not happy about that now. But every day, back before the world went crazy and we were meeting normally with our classes, my husband would record The Young and the Rest of Us for me, and then we would watch it at dinner when I got home. And so every evening when we'd be watching it together, he would say, "Wait, Sharon is married to Nick? No, I thought she was married to Nick's father, Victor." Yeah, she was. "So wait, she was married to his father and now she's married to him?" Yeah. "Wait, I thought this character was dead. And there she is." "Oh, no, that's her twin. She was dead. And this is a new character, but it's her long lost twin." Right. And he'll be like, "I don't even care." But he does care because he keeps interrupting and asking a gazillion trillion questions all the time, right? He does care about the conflict in the young and the rest of us. And the reason I like to watch it is because no matter how crummy my life is, it's never as bad as the conflicts going on with the Newmans and the Abbotts and the Young and the Restless. So, so at least one person, the protagonist, the main character through whose eyes we're seeing things, is usually a force in the conflict. It could be a struggle against nature, like in To Build a Fire. It could be a struggle against someone else, who's the antagonist. It could be a struggle against society, like all the Charles Dickens novels. It could be a struggle for mastery of two elements within the same person, as in Macbeth, a struggle against fate or destiny. Usually there's more than one conflict in a story. So, for example, Hamlet has a struggle within the character, a struggle with another character, the king, and a struggle with fate. So he's just all messed up, right? Conflict is that raw material out of which the plot, what happens, is constructed. And then climax is the turning point. It's the point of highest interest where we as readers make the greatest emotional response. And it can be the crisis at which the rising action reverses and becomes the falling action. That's what follows the climax. It shows the downfall of the hero in a tragedy, and it could end with a catastrophe, it could end with a resolution, or denouement. That's a French word that means unknotting, the final unraveling of the mystery, right? The solution, the explanation of all the secrets that we've been waiting for. So point of view is just the viewpoint from which the story is told. It's the way in which the action is presented. It's the eyes through which the action in a work of literature could be viewed. It's the narrator, also called the persona of the story. The writer pretends to be someone else, much like an actor on the stage, right? Point of view is usually for third person. It can be first person. I walked up the hill to the lonely dark castle, right? So when it's first person, it's a little more immediate. The narrator might know just a little bit about what's really happening, or the narrator could know everything about what's happening. So here are the different kinds of points of view. There's third person objective, sort of think of a fly on the wall. So the narrator's not a character in the story, but an outsider. And it tells us what's happening, but not the inner thoughts of the character. So it's like a newspaper reporter, just giving the facts, right? It may be omniscient, all-knowing third person. So the narrator knows everything, can move from place to place, can go backward and forward in time, can go into the minds of all the characters and tell their thoughts. It could be third person limited. So the narrator is not all-knowing. The story is presented and seen as understood by one character, and the reader is given information only about what that one character sees, hears, feels, and thinks, right? So the narrator could be a major or a minor character, or just a witness to the story. First person, so the narrator is identified by I, may be naive. So just like a real person, the narrator may not understand the real meaning of life or events, right, just yet. May use a diary, a letter, detached autobiography, a memoir form. There's interior monologue, so the story takes place only in the mind of the character. Those are really cool stories. Everything presented is limited to the inner responses of that character. Setting, we know this is where, when, under what conditions the story or the play or the poem happens. But it's also the customs, the values, the climate that affect the decisions of the characters. So it's physical, the actual geographic location. Are we in a city? Are we out in the country? What nation are we in? What part of the world are we in? What's the climate like? It can be environmental. What are the morals, the habits, the values, the customs, the attitudes of the people? It may be a dominant element, but it never exists by itself. So ask yourself when you're reading, what does setting contribute to the whole of this work? It may make the plot or the character plausible or believable. It may influence the character. It may provide the antagonist for the protagonist. So like in Eudora Welty's A Worn Path, which is a beautiful story. The antagonist is the setting. We have an elderly woman walking this path through the forest, and the weather and all of the obstacles in her way are really the antagonist causing the conflict. Setting can exemplify the theme, and it may evoke an emotional tone or atmosphere. So if it's a dark, rainy, sad kind of setting, right? All of this gives you things to write about in paper one. And then theme, the big idea. This is the main thing we're going for in every paper we write in this class. What's the central idea? What's the insight into life? The statement about what life means. It unifies and controls the work. It may be deliberately ambiguous, okay? We may disagree on what it is. There may be more than one. It may not be in accord with our own beliefs and values personally, but we can identify what the theme is without accepting it as being true or right. It's usually not given to us on a silver platter. It's not offered up. It's not spelled out. Rather, we have to dig for it. But that's what makes literature interesting. It explores issues and questions. It proposes tentative answers, maybe. Various elements in the work combine to create theme. Ask yourself, what does this work say about the way life is? So remember, a topic and a theme may be two different things. The topic may be the Holocaust. But when you're trying to get to theme, ask yourself, what does this story say about the way life is? How has the protagonist changed? What's the central conflict and its outcome, right? So that's the elements of fiction. And the other few things that you need to do this week are to post in the week one discussion board. There are two topics. The first one is getting to know you, and the second one is tell me a story. So you'll go to discussions up at the top of the page, and you'll follow the instructions there. The weekly checklist will also give you instructions. Getting to know you is the topic where you need to make a response to a classmate. And you want to complete both of those topics in the board this time by Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. But from this point forward, beginning in week 2, your initial posting for every topic will always be due by a Wednesday night at 11:59 p.m., while your response to the one classmate in the designated topic will be due on a Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. And then you'll need to sign and date and return your completed syllabus form found at the end of the syllabus. And there are 3 different ways that you can do that virtually. Pick the way that is the most easy for you. Next week in week 2, we'll be getting into some actual readings from our first unit. And we'll be talking about incorporating quotations, which is very important. So thank you for bearing with me in the week 1 videos, parts 1 and 2. Welcome to the class, and best of luck to you. I'll see you next time around.